As reported in the March 8, 1976 issue of the Wisconsin Northeast Post, a married couple claims that one evening in 1975, they were visited by three very strange characters. Reporter Carol Whalen interviewed the couple about their experience, which, even today, ranks as one of the strangest. In this video, I will be delving into the strange case of Anne and Peter Eilbes. Peter Eilbes, 64, worked as a foreman at a local construction firm until his retirement in 1973. He lived in a modest home in the Milwaukee suburb of Wauwatosa in Wisconsin with his wife Anne, 59. On the evening of November 10, 1975, the couple had just finished their supper and were sitting down to watch some television when, at around 7:50 p.m., the doorbell rang. Wondering who would be knocking at such a late hour, Anne peered through the door's curtained window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the evening visitor. Right under the veranda, a few feet from the door, stood a strangely dressed figure of average height. He was grasping a 5-foot white staff with his left hand. Opening the inner door, Anne quickly locked the screen door. Even though it was November, Peter hadn't put on the storm door as it had been a mild fall, and the cold Wisconsin winter had not yet arrived. "Yes?" Anne asked through the screen door. Getting no response, she repeated, "Yes?" At this point, she turned to her husband for assistance. "Come here, he doesn't talk," she said. Peter went to the door too. Upon seeing the strange character, he remarked, "What is this? Something left over from trick-or-treat?" With that, Peter unlocked the screen door and opened it in order to get a better look. The lights from the interior of his home clearly lit the visitor. The skin on his face was the same as smoked meat, and the face was lined with deep grooves, Peter told Carol Whalen. He went on to describe the stranger's mouth as a small, puckered opening no bigger than a dime. Other than recalling that the stranger had a pointed chin, Peter could not remember any other facial features. Curiously, Anne also had trouble giving a description of the visitor's face. When she tried to recall it, she always drew a blank, except for the hat. It was shaped like a man's straw hat, except the brim was more narrow, she recalled. Peter added another detail to the description, namely that the person had tufts of hair sticking out from either side of the hat. He could not remember the color of the hair. Peter initially thought it was a prankster, and he reached out to grab the person. The visitor raised his white staff and rapped it on the sidewalk. The staff made 3 clicking sounds, and the stranger moved away. "He didn't step back or jump back. He just drifted away from me," Peter told Whalen. It was at that moment that Peter became aware of 4 other creatures out on the lawn and in the street. They were all dressed alike, and they all carried a white staff in their left hands, Peter recalled. One of them was heavier than the rest. He was out in the middle of the street. He was rapping his staff on the asphalt and floating 2 or 3 feet above the ground each time it clicked. The staff seemed to be some kind of energy stick. The roly-poly one seemed to be having the time of his life, bouncing up and down like that. He looked like the astronauts when they jumped on the moon, only he seemed to have more control over his movements than they did. Peter described the other 3 visitors. They seemed to be moving across the lawn. Their feet were making walking motions, but they were 2 or 3 inches above the ground, he told Whalen excitedly. All of the figures, he noted, had a deformed appearance. Their hands looked like arthritic claws, and their legs were bent and bowed. They looked like oversized gnomes, Peter noted. As I leaned out, Anne grabbed hold of the suspenders on my overalls and pulled. When she got me back inside, I must have gone into a state of shock. I know I knew exactly what they looked like when I was leaning out the door, but once I was inside the house, I couldn't remember much about their faces or dress. As I fell into a chair, Anne looked out the front window. I could see only 3 of them, Anne recalled. The one that had been at the door was drifting across the lawn. He turned and raised his hand to me. It wasn't a clenched fist, just kind of bent. That's how all their hands were, naturally. Both Peter and his wife told Whalen that at no point did they feel threatened. When asked by Whalen why they thought the visitors had knocked on their door, Peter could not give an answer. He reasoned that their way of communicating was probably different from ours because their mouths were so much smaller. He even wondered how they could eat with such a small opening, and concluded that maybe they could drink liquids through a straw. As soon as they regained their composure, Peter and Ann called the Wauwatosa police. Officer Daniel Anderson, out on patrol, received the radio call about the strange-looking people annoying residents on Beverly Place. He cruised around the Menominee River Parkway, which was about 2 blocks from Peter and Ann's home, but found nothing of interest. Peter called the police the next day and the day after that to see if they had found anything. On the 3rd day, Officer Anderson came to their home to tell them that he had found nothing. Ann and Peter said that they got the impression that Anderson thought that they were a couple of nuts. Apparently that must have been the officer's opinion because he did not write up a report about the incident. At the time of Whalen writing up her article 1 year later, Peter and Ann were still unwavering in their belief that they had been visited by non-human, possibly extraterrestrial beings. She commented on how excited Peter got when discussing the matter. Ann insisted that had she not seen it with her own eyes, she would not believe it either. It seems their friends and relatives thought the entire experience a joke. My own son walks hunchback and says click click just to kid us, Peter said. In her effort to corroborate the event, Whalen managed to find a neighbor who confessed that what happened to the Eilbes wasn't that strange. In fact, he and his wife had observed a strange vehicle in the sky while driving through the Menominee River Parkway in 1974. These neighbors had never spoken a word of it to anyone until now, because they were afraid people would make fun of them. You know, they were right. No one takes us seriously. They all think we are making it up or that someone pulled a joke on us. I'll believe it was a joke when someone shows me those staffs, Peter told Whalen. Besides, the whole thing took about 2 minutes. Who would go to so much trouble for just 2 minutes? And how could anyone get people to float all over my lawn? One of the most interesting aspects of this case for me is how the memories of Peter and Ann were affected, how they were unable to recall certain details of their face despite looking directly at them. Peter's inability to recall seems the most pronounced, in that he could perfectly remember their faces when outside the door, but upon crossing back over the threshold of the door, back into the home, he could not. To me, it was as if he crossed some kind of invisible boundary, something John Keel talked about occasionally. Outside, Peter was in their space, for lack of a better word, and could see them perfectly, and all of his senses were intact. But upon crossing back over that invisible boundary, he removed himself from their space, thus limiting his recall. His wife, from what I could tell, was also limited in what she could remember, even though she, at no point, stepped out the door. Mainly she just recalled their hats. Neither of them gave a description of the eyes, which is odd. In any normal encounter, the first thing people notice is the eyes. But here, it's the one detail they could not recall. Anyone who's watched Hellier, most notably Season 2, will note how prevalent staffs, wands, and sticks are in these types of ET reports. They pop up everywhere, though the staffs in this case seem to be used as some kind of flotation device. A simple tap on the ground allowed the figure holding it to rise up off the ground and float about. The more they tapped, the higher they floated. Peter likened it to astronauts on the moon, though what is curious is his description of how the one on the street seemed to be quite exhilarated, joyously tapping his staff and jumping about, like a child with a new toy. I got the impression that the figure on the street was unfamiliar with the device, just by his actions, and was seemingly testing it out. But to what end? Why did they knock on Ann and Peter's door of all the other doors in the neighborhood? To scare them? To show off their new white staffs and the abilities it provided them? Or did they have another purpose? While there is no mention of missing time or spaceships, I do wonder if something else occurred that night. It's already indicated that some aspects of Anne and Peter's memories were affected during the event. For Peter, his memory dissipated after he crossed an imaginary threshold, which makes me wonder what else they might have forgotten. This case also brings into focus the more trickster-like aspects of the phenomenon. If in fact Anne and Peter weren't actually taken, and things played out as they described, then what exactly did the beings accomplish? It should be noted that on November 10, 1975, the night this happened, a large number of mysterious events transpired. This included 2 UFOs landing on a highway in Kansas, a UFO hovering near a nuclear facility on the Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota. Another UFO checked out a chemical plant in Ohio. In Mesa, Arizona, the sky inexplicably turned blue, as while police in Liberty, Missouri, and Nashua, Montana, were reported to have chased UFOs up and down their respective highways for some period of time. More than 15 separate incidents were recorded. Probably the most disturbing was the Edmund Fitzgerald cargo ship, which vanished with its entire 29-man crew in Lake Superior. No distress signals were ever sent out before it sank, and while debris from the ship was eventually located, only a single crew member was ever found. Were all these events connected in some way, or were they just random occurrences all happening on the same night?